Good morning, and thanks for everyone who has joined us for our webinar today, What You Need to Know About Archiving Backups and Disaster Recovery. We're going to get started in just 1 minute as people are filing in, so stay tuned. We'll be starting 1 minute. All right, thanks for everyone who has joined us this morning for our webinar, What You Need to Know About Archiving, Backups, and Disaster Recovery. We appreciate your time this morning. We're going to get started. So first, let's start by talking about what the differences are between just doing backups and having a disaster recovery plan, and then even further, taking that to what we call a business continuity plan. So when we're talking about backups, which we know all businesses do, this is basically the building block of how you back up your data. Everybody's doing backups in different methods. We're going to talk a little bit about what some of those methods are later and tell you what some new ones are that we're recommending. But disaster recovery, this goes beyond that. Now, this refers to how a company might recover from larger scale disasters, earthquakes, terror attacks, who knows, even, things like a fire, flood. It could all happen to us. And then taking it one last step to business continuity, this is not just the recovery process, but this is the process that involves strategizing what's going to make most sense for the agency. If there's a problem, you're not just going to run to your backup server and start restoring backups if your building had burned down. There's a lot involved to actually continue your business once those things happen. So we're going to give you some tips on not only how do we do our backups and recover from them, but how do we actually continue operating our business in an effective manner. And that encompasses both disaster recovery and backups. So we've all know what kind of stuff we have out there, we think, but let's just run through a quick list just to highlight some things that you may not consider when you're doing your backup solution, when you're talking about archiving, or when you're doing your disaster recovery planning. So we know we've got our electronic communications, email, right? How about instant messaging? We've got correspondence with clients, suppliers, and whatnot. We've got documents, but consider both we've got paper and electronic. Our spreadsheets, databases, customer and employee records, of course. Other things like transactional data, contracts, sales info. We know a lot of those are online now, but how do we keep those, or how are we responsible? And how about healthcare? For those that do life and health, there are extra rules in place to make sure that we're taking their extra privacy into account. And then other data produced from other activities. And where are we getting this information? So are we considering in all of this not only the email system, but the management system? How about all the other data on your server's hard drives? For that matter, how about what's on your workstation hard drives? That does include what's on your desktops in most cases, and people don't really consider their desktops as a backed up location, even though a lot of people do store important information there. How about your backup media itself? And then how about things like laptop hard drives and even what's in your filing cabinets? So we're going to sneak in briefly just to talk about data retention policy, because that does come into play when we're talking about what we should be archiving, what we should be backing up, and how we continue business if there is a disaster. So you do need a data retention policy, and I'm going to share a couple quick headlines for what kind of things should be in your policy. Having a proper data retention policy again, plays an important role in business continuity, because then what's important to bring back and how far back to go. So you need to go into the details of things like what types of data is out there, what is the length of time that you need to hold that data for. because you might not worry about bringing back 12 years of data if your server goes. If you have a data retention policy in place, that's just going to speed up your recovery. And how about who this policy applies to? You want to make sure that your data retention policy clearly describes everybody who's covered by the policy, and what those procedures are to be followed in the case of a breach or an incident. And who's responsible? The last and I think most important thing about a data retention policy is who is responsible. Agency needs to make sure that we've got a certain person or people that are going to be making sure that these things are held true. We're often asked, how should we be doing our data retention? And unfortunately, I think that answer is it kind of depends. There are different rules for accounting for policy data, and then maybe not so important for things like marketing. There are some things that insurance companies will tell you that you need to keep forever. Some rules say 7 years for certain things, 3 for others, whether it be policy data info about taxes and accounting. So for those things, you need to determine what you have, and you're going to have to talk to the people behind those things, your accounting people, your carriers. Is it in your contract for how long it says that you need to keep those things? Another important question that we often get skipped is, let's say that your relationship with a carrier or a vendor ends. What does your contract say for being able to keep that data? Do you have to keep it for a certain period of time, or heck, do you even get access to that data anymore once your relationship ends with them? So important to know first, what data do we have out there and how long do we need to keep it for, so we can then plan properly around our archiving and backups. The last important piece of this is training. IT stuff aside, the IT guys can set up things to automatically delete old emails or do fancy things like that, right? But when it comes down to it, you need to make sure your people are also following by your policies. That's a tough one. We do have lots to talk about as far as training goes. That could probably be its own conversation. So if there are any questions that you'd like some advice on how to go about this, please feel free to put those in the webinar feedback, and we'll make sure we can address that with you. So moving on quickly, let's talk about archiving now. So we've got some ideas from our data retention policy talks of how long we should be keeping our data now, right? So let's talk about archiving and how it works and how to do it. So for starters, one of the things that we hear the most is that we're doing backups, so we've got archives, right? And I want to distinguish first and foremost that archives and backups are not the same thing. What archiving is, depending on what the system is it's moving data off for the purpose of storing it somewhere else. There are systems that can either do manual archiving or automatic. And most of the time, archiving is for saving space in your systems. And I put systems in quote because it's obviously different with what kind of system you have. When people hear archiving, the first thing we think is email archiving, right? So that's the most common one. But keep in mind that archiving usually leads to your data not being quickly accessible, or even in most cases readily accessible. Sometimes you got to go through special steps to get stuff back out of archives. So archiving shouldn't be confused with backups. So systems you may be doing archiving with, again, we mentioned email. This is probably the most common one where we're talking about archiving. So when it comes to email archiving, we recommend using an email archiving system or service. What these are going to do is they're either going to sit on your server or work with a hosted online program. They're going to intercept, if you will, and make a copy of every email that comes and goes. This is the big distinguisher between an archiving system and a backup. Most agencies used to run backups once a day. We see more advanced agencies now running them every hour. But consider that you might get an email and delete it 2 minutes later. There's a very good chance that that email wasn't caught by your backup system, but an email archiving system would catch it. And that's why we think these systems are the most powerful, because they can guarantee that all of your data is kept. Backups are a point-in-time thing, but an email archiving system is a real-time thing. It gets it all. They also offer things like very powerful searching capabilities. Uh, Most times, archiving, when we're talking about emails and getting stuff back, unfortunately, we're referring to times when we're maybe going under a lawsuit or some kind of an audit. And it's very important we can get data back very quickly. We've seen agencies spend thousands and thousands of dollars when it comes to producing information either to satisfy a subpoena or to satisfy auditors, just because they don't have a good email archiving system in place that you can do these powerful searches with. And then most email archiving systems will allow you to do what's called delegate access. Oftentimes, you'll let people access their own. You'll let department managers access the email archives of the people in their department. You'll let the higher level people then possibly access everybody's. And they're usually let you get very granular. So email archiving systems, again, most common, probably also the most flexible as far as systems that we see. The one thing we want to say too is that we recommend that people do not use the archiving built into Microsoft Outlook. So the purpose of this is not necessarily to keep track of everything, but this is more on the part where we're pulling data out of your systems. So again, the Outlook built-in archiving, that's really for your space storage as far as your server goes. This is kind of an older school thought and tendency to do. Microsoft has made a lot of improvements in email systems over time, and it used to be that you were very, very limited for what you could store data-wise. Nowadays, that's really not that big of a concern. Ask your IT people what version of an email server you're on. If that answer is even 2007 or beyond for your email server, the chances are that those database limits that were holding you back in the past are gone by. Also, hard drive space is so cheap compared to how it was in the past, you usually don't have to worry about your server filling up. So space is not at a premium like it used to be maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago. So we recommend not using archiving built into Outlook. There is lots of other data to consider when we're talking about archiving. Now, that might be just data that's on your hard drives on your servers. That might refer to stuff that's on your own desktops. Maybe raters that you're not using anymore. The comparative raters, we've seen agencies that have tens and tens and tens of thousands of old client files and quotes. So you might consider archiving off from a certain point in time. This may sound funny, but you might also consider archiving off your backups. Now, what does that mean? Well, depending on your backup system, you're probably keeping backups that go far back in time. Back in the days of tape backups, we were usually more limited. We would keep tapes for a couple of weeks, maybe a month-end tape and a year-end tape. As far as more advanced backup systems go, they usually let you go a lot further. But still consider with your data retention policies how far back you really should be going, and you might want to consider at some point in time archiving out or removing your old backup data too. Lastly, and this is maybe not fully considered archiving, but some management systems have the ability to archive or purge. Generally, this is done for two reasons, one being data retention again, and the next being for space. In our experience, we've seen that most of the time doing a purge doesn't get you a lot of space back. The space in management systems where it's kept up is in the attachments and in the scanning. And we know that over the last 5 years or so, that's become a lot more common. So going back, 7 years and further, we're seeing that people doing archiving and purging out of management systems aren't saving a lot space-wise, but again, you still may want to do it to be in line with your data retention policies. Okay, so on to backups. Let's talk about some different types of backups. There are a lot of other options out there than your old tape backup systems that we used to do back in the day. So let's talk about how they differ, pros and cons. So our most basic type of a backup is what we call a file backup. It's where we back up our files and folders. And that held true with most tape backup systems back in the day. Most tape backup systems had a piece of software that lets you do a backup to a hard drive as well. So file-based backups can be to tapes. They can be to hard drives as well. Typically, when those file backups run, you need to be quote unquote out of the system too, right? Everybody remember when you had to be out during all hours of the evening so your backups and utilities can run? If you're still doing that at your agency, chances are you're on an older type backup system now, and you'll find that the new ones will often let you get more productive time. Now, whether you want to work in the evenings or not, that's a different story, right? But you can with some of the new systems. There are also lots of cool online backup systems. I hear them on the radio all the time driving in to work, whether they're advertising for personal or business use. Some of them even have additions for both. The online backup systems are neat. They're usually file-based also. I say they're neat, though, because they're not usually robust. They're not usually what you would consider an enterprise-level solution. Again, they're really only backing up your files. You're typically not going to get things like your email out of your email server or your databases out of your client management systems and whatnot. And then what I'll call newer or more modern backup systems are what we call image-based backup systems. They're not backing up the files, but they're actually backing up the whole image of your server. These are usually a combination of backup to disk, which is fast and inexpensive, plus online backups to get that second factor of backup and a good policy for disaster preparedness, having your backups go off-site. Key piece in business continuity as well, where these systems usually do a lot more than backups. They usually let you, again, put in place what's called business continuity. Again, if your servers go out, you're going to want to restore from your backup. But what if your building goes? You might not have the option to restore from backup if you don't have a server to restore to. But often image-based backups have that extra piece where they'll actually run as your server. Or the off-site backups, you can turn them into a server and utilize that for continuing to operate your business. So if you're not sure what you have for a backup system, please ask your IT person, are we doing file backups or are we doing image-based backups now? Very important in the new day and age. So breaking down some of the differences between tapes and disks, again, I really hope everybody's not doing tape backups anymore. Cost-wise, they typically are costly over time because your tape drives are in the range of a couple $1,000s for a good one. And then the backup tapes, if you get really big, really fast ones, believe it or not, advanced backup tapes now can cost $100 a pop. If you are still doing tapes, which again we don't recommend, a typical tape rotation should be in the neighborhood of 18 to 24 tapes at least, and you want to rotate your tapes every couple years. That's $2,400 a year in just tapes. Speed-wise, tape and disc can be about the same, just depending on the investment that you have into the solution. But when it comes to volatility, tapes do wear out over time, but they're not fragile like discs. If you have a disk-based backup system, that's why we strongly encourage you to pair that with off-site backups. Because we all used to take our tapes home, right? But if you drop a tape, no worries. If you drop a hard drive, chances are it's just done. Hard drives really don't survive faults. You can get the new advanced, hard drives they call SSDs. Those are the solid-state drives that don't have moving parts, but they're usually not big enough or costly enough to have in a disk-based backup system. And then, this is a key piece too. How are those systems managed? Generally, the older tape-based backup systems are more difficult to manage. They're more difficult to restore. Where the disk-based systems, they just make this streamlined. And why is that important? Because if you can quickly work in doing a restore test every now and then, you can be more confident that you have a full solution. So let's talk about backups, the file versus the image backups. So when we're talking about our traditional tape or the software backups, and we look at our backup window, again, there's usually a significant backup window required where you have to be out of all your systems at night, right? Typically, the new systems, what we'll call the BDR or the backup and disaster recovery solutions, there's usually no backup window. Your critical systems are going to stay up and running, and you can continue to work while they run. The recovery point, systems are typically backed up every 24 hours. So really what that means is in most cases on a traditional file-based backup, you're going to lose a day's worth of work up to, even if you have a small issue. The hybrid BDR systems, they can take backups usually up to every 15 minutes, so you get a lot more granularity. And then the recovery time, this is how long you might take to get everything back. With a traditional file-based backup, chances are you're going to take up to 24 hours to get back and running at a minimum state, 48 hours to get everything back, and if you had a building disaster, it can be days, if not into the matter of weeks. With one of these new BDR systems, because again, I said that they've got the ability to do things like virtualize your systems if your servers were to go out, or even do that off-site. Usually you can be up and running in the matter of less than a half an hour, depending on how much data you have and what systems you want to get back up and running first. So again, what we're recommending is these business disaster recovery solutions, and make sure that if you're going to look at one, you've got some of the following features in it. You want to make sure you've got backup and disaster recovery plans and testing. Of course, on-site backups, but also pair that with off-site backups. You want something that's going to be backing up your email in two different ways, both a mailbox level and a message level recovery. So what that means is that you can literally go down and recover one email from the person sent or deleted, or even a contact or a calendar entry. Some of them just let you do like a whole email restore for a person, or maybe for the whole for a system. You want to make sure that you've got at least months into your data retention. Usually with these kind of systems, the bigger you go up front, the longer you can have your data retention for your backups. Again, managed, monitored, and tested. It's important that these are usually sold and done as a managed system. You're not just going to be buying a device. So keep in mind that if you don't have one of these systems, usually it's a monthly service charge to have it managed and tested every month. You want one that can act again as a standby server. So if you do have a server that goes, you can just turn your backup on and make it one of your new servers, rather than having to sometimes even wait a couple days to get a new server in to restore to. Can it do what's called a bare metal restore? So restore stuff from one server to another. And then how about this? Can it replicate to another server? We've got some customers that actually have a second backup server at a second location, and you can have that replicate there and basically turn your operation from looking at one office to another if there were something to happen to your main office. There's usually more planning involved, but this is a key piece that these systems can do replication to another location. So what if we virtualize? Maybe you have your own virtual servers in-house, or what if you're even virtualized and working out of the cloud? Well, the same backup options do apply to both virtual servers and cloud solutions. You'll want to make sure when you're talking to your IT people that you know this, and that you know you have a good, robust backup solution on your virtual servers or in your cloud. Oftentimes, you'll hear something in those realms called snapshots. And without getting too technical, what you need to know basically is snapshots are just not enough. They're a great piece to the business continuity, but they're not a complete backup solution either. Snapshots are a key piece, but not all of it. Also, this is something that's fairly new, and we've been doing for our cloud customers for quite some time now, is we're doing what we call reverse replication. So when we talk about having your backups in-house and having them on these BDR solutions, we always say it's a good idea to make sure your backups are copied off-site. If something was to happen to your building, you're still safe. Maybe it takes a little longer to recover, but your data is still accessible off-site. Well, what happens if something goes on in your cloud and that cloud provider has a major disaster? We've heard multiple times over the years that Amazon in their AWS has had disasters behind the scenes, and people have just lost days of data. Their response has usually been, sorry about that. If you read your contracts, they won't guarantee that your data is always there. So you do need to make sure that you're doing good backups, but consider a reverse replication where you're taking what's backed up in your cloud and you're pulling that down to your office, or maybe even just to a separate location, but taking what's in your cloud and downloading it a copy to your office. Like I said, we've been doing that for our cloud customers for quite some time now, and it gives that nice extra peace of mind. Okay, so we've talked about data retention and how that gets in line with archiving and backups. This all leads to disaster recovery, which is part of our business continuity plan. So again, keep in mind, business continuity is the whole big umbrella that we're under when we talk about what do we do to get back up and running when there are disasters. So what kind of disasters can there be? And I'm not talking about, how our building gets hit, but I'm talking about what they could affect. So there might be disasters with our communication systems. When it comes to planning with your business continuity plan, these are the different items you're going to want to plan around. So plan around communications. How do we manage if something happens to our email system? How about our messaging system? How about our phones? What about just being able to service your customers if those kind of things do happen? How about a data disaster, I'll call it? That would be where maybe you lose a hard drive in the server and stuff becomes corrupt. Or a few webinars ago, we talked about ransomware, where they scramble your files. I would consider ransomware and having all your files scrambled a data disaster. So what do you have in place to make sure that you can just get back maybe half of your data? How about if one of your servers just fully goes out? Or what if your network goes out? Most people have backups of all their data. The backups are their servers. But look in your back room and look where all the cables are plugging in. If all the cables are plugging into one box and that one box goes out, you're not going to be able to operate. So another key piece, not only think about the servers, but think about your network. What do you have in place as far as that goes if there's a network disaster? Again, we don't like to think about these, but what if there's a building disaster, if there was a fire, if there was a flood? You've got your BDR solution, you've got your offsite backups, but what do you have as far as a real plan in place to know how do you work? How does the word spread? How do your people function if their building is gone? Do you have things put in place like an offsite working location? Who calls who? You might have heard of the term call tree. So we got to think about all those when we're putting together our business continuity plan. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is if you're trying to build the right plan, your fundamental question is, what is your recovery objective? If your business can't survive even with 1 day of access to something, what is that something for starters? Because there's lots of different key pieces there. And then how quickly can you get back up and running on that one thing, whether it be the communications or giving your people access to service your customers? We want to build your plan around those things. Generally, the more things you add to your list that you want to be without for the least amount of time, the bigger your plan is going to be, the bigger expense it is going to be. But think about it like business insurance, business productivity insurance. If interested, we at Smart do have a template for a business continuity plan. We've done a lot of the legwork for you, and we've gone through this ourselves very extensively. So we have a lot of the outline already made. We're happy to share this if anyone is interested. Please, again, just feel free to ask via the poll and the survey that we have afterwards, or reach us directly, and we're happy to get you a copy of our scrubbed business continuity plan that you can use for your agency. So we talked about a lot, and I do thank everyone for your time. I hope you to join us for our next upcoming webinar. That is going to be on September 25th. We're going to get back into some of the fun stuff, not that this isn't fun, right, of 25 productivity and performance tips in 25 minutes. So our next webinar will prove to be fast and furious, lots of great information.